What would you do if you uncovered a secret this horrifying? Imagine standing where Lucas stood, realizing the truth. How would you react? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're here, tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories reach. If this story left you speechless, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because tomorrow, we have another unbelievable story that you won't want to miss. See you in the next one. He dug up his mother's grave. What he found will haunt you forever. Lucas Carter stood in the quiet cemetery, gripping a shovel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The early morning air was crisp, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink as the sun began to rise over the small town in Colorado. He should have been feeling the familiar comfort of dawn, but all he felt was an unbearable weight pressing on his chest. His mother, Grace Carter, had been gone for just a few weeks. They said it was a heart attack, but deep inside, Lucas had never believed it. Something wasn't right. His father, Richard Carter, had been acting strange ever since the funeral. Distant. Cold. Avoiding eye contact whenever Lucas brought up his mother. And then there was the rushed burial, almost as if his father couldn't wait to put Grace in the ground. Lucas couldn't let it go. The thoughts had been eating away at him, keeping him awake at night, his mind replaying every detail, every moment that didn't add up. He had spent weeks questioning everything, but now, he was done wondering. He needed to know the truth. The shovel hit the ground with a sharp thud, breaking the stillness of the morning. Lucas swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs as he pushed the blade deeper into the fresh soil. It was still loose, the burial recent. He worked quickly, his muscles burning with each scoop of dirt, but he didn't stop. Sweat dripped down his face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't care about the consequences. He didn't care if the whole town thought he had lost his mind. Because deep down, in the very core of his being, he knew. She didn't just die. She was taken from him. His mother had been full of life, healthy, happy, and then, just like that, she was gone. No warning. No explanation that made sense. Lucas gritted his teeth, his arms shaking from exhaustion as he reached the final layer of dirt. His stomach twisted into knots as he saw it, the wooden coffin, barely covered. His breath hitched. This was it. The moment of truth. He hesitated, gripping the shovel tighter, staring at the box that held the woman who had raised him, loved him, and protected him. The weight of what he was about to do nearly crushed him. But then he remembered her smile, her laughter, and the way she had always told him to trust his instincts. With a deep breath, Lucas reached forward and pried open the lid. The lid creaked as Lucas Carter pried it open, the sound slicing through the silent morning like a blade. His breath caught in his throat as he stared into the coffin. His mother, Grace Carter, lay before him, her face still and pale, just as he had last seen her at the funeral. But something was wrong, something was terribly, horribly wrong. Lucas's heart pounded against his ribs as his eyes darted over her body. Her hands. They were clenched into tight fists, her fingernails broken, jagged, and bloodied. His stomach twisted as he saw the deep scratches on the inside of the coffin lid, faint but undeniable. She had tried to get out. Lucas stumbled back, his legs giving out as he collapsed onto the damp grass, his breathing uneven. His hands trembled as he gripped the coffin's edge, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. She had been alive. His mother, the kindest, most loving woman he had ever known, had been buried alive. A choked sound escaped his throat, part sob, part disbelief. His entire world tilted, crashing down around him in a way he could never have imagined. He thought he had prepared himself for whatever truth he might uncover. But not this. Never this. Tears blurred his vision as he crawled back toward the coffin, reaching out with shaking hands to touch hers, cold, stiff, lifeless. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know. Grief crashed into him like a tidal wave, but beneath it, something else stirred. Something dark. Something burning. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this to her. Someone had made sure she was buried before her time. And Lucas was going to find out who. With newfound determination, he wiped the tears from his face and fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed 911. The operator's calm voice felt surreal compared to the chaos inside his mind. 911, what's your emergency? Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing his voice to stay steady. I need to report a crime. He took a breath, his jaw tightening. My mother, she was buried alive. As the words left his mouth, the weight of them hit him all over again. And he knew, this was just the beginning. The sirens cut through the morning stillness, their sharp wails growing louder as they approached the cemetery. Lucas Carter stood frozen, his phone still clutched in his trembling hand, his eyes locked on his mother's coffin. He barely registered the sound of tires skidding on gravel as police vehicles and an ambulance came to a stop near the burial site. The flashing red and blue lights painted the headstones in haunting colors, illuminating the grim truth of what he had just uncovered. A car door slammed. Footsteps rushed toward him. Sir, step away from the coffin, a commanding voice called out. Lucas turned to see Detective Sarah Lawson, a tall, sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, striding toward him. Her expression was unreadable, but the way she scanned the open grave and the disturbed coffin told him she already knew. This was no ordinary call. Lucas stepped back, his arms still shaking. I didn't know what else to do, he said, his voice hoarse. She was alive when they buried her. The detective's face remained calm, but he didn't miss the slight widening of her eyes. She crouched down, peering inside the coffin, her gaze locking onto the bloodied nails, the scratches on the lid, the unmistakable signs of a struggle. A forensic investigator hurried forward, snapping photos while another officer called in a medical examiner. The weight of what Lucas had found was beginning to sink in, not just for him, but for everyone now standing around the grave. We need to exhume the body properly, Detective Lawson said, standing up. She turned to Lucas. Tell me everything. Why did you come here? What made you think something was wrong? Lucas ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his breath. She was healthy. There was no reason for her to just drop dead from a heart attack. And my father, he swallowed hard, his throat tight, he was acting weird. He rushed the funeral. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I just knew something wasn't right. Detective Lawson nodded, jotting down notes. And your father? Where is he now? Lucas exhaled sharply. Probably at home. The detective motioned to one of the officers. Bring Richard Carter in for questioning. Lucas's stomach twisted. His father had always been a distant man, cold and calculating, but could he really be capable of something this monstrous? As the officers moved, the medical examiner arrived, pulling on gloves before carefully inspecting Grace Carter's body. A grim silence settled over the cemetery as he examined her hands, her wrists, and then he looked up, his face pale. Detective, she was alive when they buried her. The words struck Lucas like a hammer. He had known at the moment he saw the signs, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run cold. Detective Lawson's jaw tightened. She turned back to Lucas. This isn't just a suspicious death anymore. She motioned toward her officers. We're opening a homicide investigation. Lucas felt his fists clench. Good. Whoever did this to his mother wasn't going to get away with it. Not if he had anything to say about it. Lucas Carter sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. The hum of the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed in his ears, but his focus was elsewhere, on the horrifying reality that had just unfolded. His mother hadn't died of a heart attack. She had been buried alive. Detective Sarah Lawson sat across from him, her sharp eyes locked onto his. She flipped open her notebook, her expression unreadable. Tell me more about your father. Lucas swallowed hard. Richard Carter doesn't show emotions. He's always been cold, distant. But after my mom's death, it was like he didn't care at all. He rushed the funeral, barely spoke about her, and wouldn't even look me in the eye. Detective Lawson tapped her pen against the table. And you think he had something to do with this? Lucas exhaled, his pulse hammering in his ears. I don't want to believe it, but it all points to him. And then there's Evelyn. The detective's eyebrows lifted slightly. Evelyn? Lucas nodded, his jaw tightening. Evelyn Owens. She's been around a lot since my mom died. She's a nurse. And my father, well, let's just say he didn't waste any time getting close to her. Detective Lawson scribbled something down before leaning forward. Do you think Evelyn helped him? Lucas clenched his fists. She had access to the kind of drugs that could make someone appear dead. And if my father wanted my mom out of the way, she's the only person who could have made that happen. Before Detective Lawson could respond, the door creaked open. An officer stepped inside, his face grim. We brought Richard Carter in for questioning. You're going to want to hear this. Lucas's stomach twisted as he followed the detective down the hall. Through the one-way mirror, He saw his father sitting in the next room, calm, almost bored, leaning back in his chair like this was just another inconvenience. Detective Lawson stepped inside, dropping a file onto the table. "Richard, let's cut to the chase. We found signs of a struggle inside your wife's coffin. We have forensic evidence that proves she was alive when she was buried. Would you like to explain that?" Richard let out a slow, measured sigh, rubbing his temple. "Look, I don't know what my son told you, but this is ridiculous. Grace died of a heart attack. The doctors confirmed it." Detective Lawson didn't blink. "Then why is there evidence of foul play? Why did you rush the funeral?" Richard smirked, shaking his head. "You people are grasping at straws." She slid a document across the table, a copy of Grace Carter's life insurance policy. "Then explain this. $500,000. You're the sole beneficiary." For the first time, Richard's smirk faltered. He glanced at the paper, then back at the detective. Lucas watched from the other side of the glass, his breath caught in his throat. Then his father leaned back in his chair, and the smirk returned. "Fine," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You want the truth? You're not going to like it." Richard Carter leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, a smug expression spreading across his face. "Fine. You want the truth? You're not going to like it." Detective Sarah Lawson didn't flinch. She stared at him, waiting. "Go ahead." Richard sighed dramatically, as if he were simply telling a story, not confessing to something unthinkable. "Grace was weak," he said, his voice cold. "She was always in the way. Always so perfect, so selfless. She made me feel like the bad guy for wanting more out of life." Lucas Carter, standing behind the one-way mirror, felt his stomach churn. His father spoke about his mother like she was a burden, like she wasn't even human. His fists clenched at his sides as he forced himself to stay still, to listen. "You killed her." Detective Lawson's voice was sharp, unwavering. Richard chuckled. "Kill her? No. I just help things along." He leaned forward slightly, his smirk deepening. "A little something to help her sleep. Maybe too much. But that wasn't my idea." Detective Lawson narrowed her eyes. "Who else was involved?" Richard's smirk widened. "Evelyn, of course." Lucas's breath hitched. "Evelyn." He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of rage and betrayal crashing over him. Richard shrugged as if this was all one big inconvenience. She knew exactly what to use, how much. She's a nurse, after all. When Grace went into a coma, it was easy. Doctors thought she was dead. No one questioned it. And just like that, problem solved. Lucas's vision blurred as his father's words sank in. His mother hadn't just been killed, she had been left to suffer, trapped inside a coffin, alone in the dark, clawing at the wood, fighting to escape. And Richard Carter didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Detective Lawson's voice was ice cold. Richard Carter, you are under arrest for the murder of Grace Carter. The smug expression finally cracked. Murder? Richard scoffed as officers entered the room. I didn't kill her. She was already dying. No, you buried her alive. Lawson snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. That's murder. As the officers led Richard away, Lucas stepped forward, meeting his father's gaze through the glass. For the first time, there was no smugness, only a flicker of something else. Regret? Fear? It didn't matter. His mother had been avenged. But it wasn't over yet. Evelyn was next. What would you do if you uncovered a truth this horrifying? Imagine standing in Lucas's shoes, discovering that someone you trusted had buried a loved one alive. Would you have had the courage to dig up the grave? To confront the truth? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment where your instincts told you something wasn't right, and you turned out to be correct? Share your experiences. Your stories matter, and we love reading them. Also, tell us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. If this story left you speechless, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping real-life tale. And trust me, tomorrow's story is even more shocking. You won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.